Hello, English language teachers around the world. It's Fluency MC here, also known as Jason R. Levine. Yeah. Happy again to host the American TESOL Institute webinar series, which we do once a month. It's a great honor to be here with you guys today, whether you're here live, thanks for coming. If you're watching asynchronously, great too. Make sure to share this out once we put it online so people who can't be here live will have a chance to check it out. And last month rather, the focus was on teaching speaking skills, how to develop speaking skills. And today we're going to talk about teaching grammar better as opposed to teaching better grammar. That's an important difference, an adverbial difference there, right? So, better grammar to me has the sound of, there's something wrong with the way you speak, right? And we're going to get into that at some point today. We're going to start with this question: what is grammar? Couple definitions, very, very similar versions of these. The first one I don't like so much. The set of rules that explain how words are used. I don't like the word rule, because to me, a rule is something you set out at the beginning. Like, okay, this is how we're going to set up this language grammatically. And of course, that's not how it works, right? We've figured out how there are patterns with grammar. And then we say, okay, here is the rule, and it could be useful if it's very consistent pattern. But anyway, it's not so much a rule as patterns. The whole system and structure of a language, I like that better, especially the structure part. I want to throw this out right away and see if you agree or disagree with it. Lexis meaning the words, vocabulary. And if that's a little bit confusing, don't worry. I'm going to show you another way to think about it. But this comes from Michael Lewis and the lexical approach. Traditionally, before we look at the other ways to say it, course books and approaches were more language consisting of lexicalized grammar, not grammaticalized lexis. So what does that mean? It means that traditionally, we start with thinking about language in terms of grammar, and then, okay, we need some vocabulary, some words in there to explain how the grammar works. But I don't think many people feel that way anymore, fortunately. They think more of it like this, that vocabulary is the main thing, right? And grammar helps create the structure of it so that that language can be managed, can flow, and the word subservient, I like. Yes, it's vocabulary first. That doesn't mean grammar is not important. It's about the role that each plays, a very different role. The simplest way to think about it is grammar is the glue that holds the words together. So to start with focusing on the glue, to put the glue as our central focus, doesn't really make sense, does it? And you'll see so many times teachers feeling frustrated, students frustrated when they approach grammar structures as the primary focus and not vocabulary. So if you don't agree with this, that's fine. I would love to debate you, but I'm definitely going to be putting forward ideas today based on this way of looking at it. So a lexical approach to teaching grammar puts lexis as the primary focus and explores how the grammar of words, of chunks, phrases is important, because our brains are able to encode chunks of language. But if we're trying to memorize grammar rules, thinking that that's going to help us remember language and be able to recall it, no, that can help us understand how the language works. And sometimes that helps motivate learners, especially, analytical-minded adults. But if you think about how in the past, people studied languages the way they study something like computer science, it was as a subject. But if you want to learn to use a computer, right, that's a very different thing. And if learning English as a skill, like computers as a skill, is the focus, which it is, right, 99% of the time, then it doesn't make sense to focus on the glue. It makes sense to focus on how to understand and remember chunks of language. What do we mean by chunks? Well, this is not really the chunking yet. What I have here are the vocabulary words. This is to demonstrate it's really the content, not the grammar, that's about communication, basic communication. If I say, this wastes time, who do dishes, dinner, flight take 2 hours, and so forth, you can understand me. It's kind of caveman talk, right? But it demonstrates that without grammar, because the grammar words have been removed, I'll explain what I mean by grammar words or function words, and the content words are there. Now, if we look at what's missing, right? If you're a native speaker of the language, a very advanced speaker, you're not going to have trouble filling this in. And that's not because I would argue you know a lot about grammar rules and grammar structures. It's just what goes together to chunk these phrases, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, together in a sentence. So take a look. Now, of course, there are variations. For example, I need to lose some weight. You need to lose some weight, right? But if I say to you, like, need to lose weight, right? Or just lose weight. There we go, without the grammar words. What do you notice here? I put in the word and sentence stress. That's what's being communicated for the basic meaning, right? This wastes time. So this is a waste of time. The fact that the grammar reduces shows that it's not as important to convey meaning. What it's important, what its role as the glue is to make things flow better and to show specific nuances. For example, time frame, present, past, right? The pronoun references and things like this, which can be communicated through, remember, like need, lose weight, right? Or, yesterday, movie, right? Without the grammar, we can still convey things like time and pronoun reference. But this is not an argument for saying we don't need to teach grammar or learn grammar. It's to show how things really work. So when we listen in the language, it's different when we read. Obviously, when we listening for those content words, not listening for the grammar. But when we speak and write, that grammar becomes very, very important, unless your needs, and we'll talk about that with the language, are simply to convey meaning like a caveman. And maybe they are, if you're just traveling or basic things you want to say, perhaps you don't need to focus that much on grammar. You certainly have no choice but to focus on vocabulary. But what about the chunking? So waste of time, gonna do, about 2 hours, received an email from. The chunking includes some grammar words, right? And that's super important, because is it better to explain things like articles, pronouns, prepositions in cases like this, or is it better to learn as one whole, right? That is a rhetorical question. I think, unless you disagree with me, it is much better to learn that way than why is it waste of time, not waste in time or to time, or right? The other thing about chunking, huge thing about chunking, is if you learn a chunk, you can learn similar chunks, right? So you say, well, if you learn the present perfect, you can use present perfect in many situations. Yeah, but without the vocabulary chunking, you're not going to be able to just learn how the present perfect works and go off and use it the way that you want to. But if you get enough exposure to chunks of language, and you can learn other chunks to build on that, for example, waste of money or waste of space, waste of time, waste of resources, and so forth, then you are learning grammar. You are learning word grammar, and that word grammar develops into sentence grammar when you build out from the chunk and into other chunks. Now, Does that mean I'm saying you don't need to learn verb tenses and you don't need to learn, relative clauses and things like this? No, but especially at the beginning levels, that's really important to think about. Explicit teaching of syntax, sentence, verb tenses and sentences, I think should take a back seat to lexical phrases. The phrases more important for students to acquire a base of vocabulary and grammar together at the lexical chunking level. So my idea today, that was sort of the first part. What I just talked about, again, is looking at grammar as the glue and focusing on vocabulary. And now I'd like to think about how we teach that glue in terms of why, what, who, when, and how. So especially the what and the how are going to be the big ones, but there are important things I want to include with why and who and when. So we've already sort of talked about why. We started getting into it, right? I mentioned, should we teach grammar or not? We don't need to teach grammar. I think that that's ridiculous, unless what the person is saying is that we want, if you look below teaching versus learning, that it's not necessary to teach grammar so much as it's necessary for people to learn grammar. I don't think anyone would say you don't need to learn grammar unless they mean learn it in a certain way that's not working. But if you don't learn grammar, then you are saying things like, need, lose, wait, me, hungry, go, store, right? Which, except in very limited situations, that's not what our learners are learning English for, to build their competency and proficiency in English. So if you can learn grammar on your own without a teacher, or if you as a teacher can teach using such an inductive approach, we're going to talk about that later, that you don't feel like you're really teaching grammar, it's kind of happening along the way, okay, then maybe it's not necessary in that explicit way. But we know we need grammar, right? How can you communicate effectively to make your language specific and flow, not to mention how you're perceived by people in certain situations if you're not using accurate grammar. And that could be because it's harder to communicate with you, or it could also be because they think, oh, this person, isn't smart, doesn't speak well, makes too many mistakes, there are realities, right, with school and jobs where that's really important too. But teaching it and learning it, what's more important? Learning it. So we're talking about teaching grammar today, but the idea, I hope you agree, is teaching grammar, being a teacher, helping your students learn grammar through what you're doing as a teacher. But we also have what the syllabus requires, or the curriculum, the principal, the school district, tests, parents, and things like this. So we need to take that in consideration, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about who in a few moments. Now what? Now the big question with what, I think for a lot of people, is kind of a what-when. My when is different, so bear with me. What, in the sense, like, what do I teach now with these students at this level? If it's dictated to me by my syllabus or my book, maybe I have to do that. But if I'm in charge, or if I have some flexibility and I realize this syllabus and this book, it's not really working this way, these students need to focus on this or that, is it helpful to think about how a second language learner develops, competency in grammar? Should they learn this first or that first? Now, beware of things like this on the internet. If you search for a sequence of how to teach grammar, I saw this, which is perplexing in different ways. I'm not going to comment on it now. You'll see what I mean. I saw this, which makes a little more sense. But can you really say what grammar to teach first? There are just too many variables. If you have a blank slate, students who've never heard a word of the language, then maybe you could do that, but you certainly wouldn't be doing something like this. This is the end of the list here too. These are all things that are important in grammar. But I think you can do this. So if you're thinking, but I need something, well, I think with verb tenses, you can do a little bit of this, right? So for example, with the present simple, not starting with main verbs, but present simple with be, right? Which goes kind of three ways, right? It's, if you take is, right? Like he is, and then a person, a noun, or it is a noun, and then adjectives, she is nice. And then with the present progressive, right? And that once you get that, and then you do the other verbs, you kind of do the present progressive at this same time. Now, the time here, I would definitely put those three as what to do first. Then do you do past or future? I don't think that's so important anymore. But affirmative, negative, and interrogative at every point, right? So definitely you want to learn, if you're learning present simple with other verbs, like the most common ones, like be, have, do, say, go, get, make, know, think, take, I think are the 10 most common. Then you're going to want, if it's take, for example, I take, she takes, but then also I don't take, he doesn't take, right? And do you take, does she take, right? And I have an activity to show you with just this very thing later when we talk about how to practice grammar. So just an example, I think if we're talking about the most basic sentences with verbs, you would not want to go further than this until students feel very comfortable with it, and they can express almost anything they want to express with these five. But look at a conversation like this, and this is where we realize how it's impossible to think what we should teach first and second and third and fourth, which makes sense because remember, we said earlier, at least I said, and I hope you agree, that language is grammaticalized lexis, not lexicalized grammar. If it was about just learning grammar sequentially, right, that would be nice, right? It's certainly easier to make a course book that way. And that's what has happened until recently. Actually, now still, it's a big problem, I think. But I think it is changing a little bit. But if you look at a conversation like this, I think we'd agree this is pretty everyday, basic A1, A1, A2, not even A2, right? So we have present simple, we have present continuous, we have negative. There's a lot of stuff happening here. So to think, oh, we need to just learn one, then this, then this, then that, right? No. Now this includes the things that I was just talking about in terms of the verb tenses, but you also have fixed expressions like how about you? These are chunks, right? What about modal verbs? On the list we just saw, those lists were saying modal verbs are later, but don't you think might, for example, would be something to learn earlier? And then what about this? Conditionals, modals like would you and could you? If you think, well, we shouldn't teach those now, these students are A1 or A2, but these are expressions that we need. These are structures that do not have to be taught as grammatical structures, right? Would you like to come with us? That would be great. I'd love to, but I'm busy, etc. This isn't about structure, is it? Would you say that lower level students shouldn't use the grammar that's included in these sentences until later? Well, if you haven't learned about language functions, this, along with the Lexis idea, is, I think, the key to it all. So if we agree that these functions are necessary at every level, and that there are ways of making offers, for example, that are more or less complicated, I think we can agree that "would you like to" is not it's a very high frequency and not complex choice for making an offer. But if you break it down, you could say it is. Oh, it's the conditional. We have to explain what would means. I don't think so. What we need to do is explain this is a way to make an offer. And that'd be great. That would be, but that'd be great is a way to accept it, and so forth. Could you help me with something? I think the best case scenario is that's learned very early. And then much later, you're doing things with like, if I could understand Japanese, then I would apply to this program. And right, that's a different thing. That's when maybe you're at a level where you can start thinking more about what this grammar is about. But not necessarily, but definitely at the early stages. And if we're talking about kids, forget about it. You're not going to be talking about the grammar structures and names, and this is present perfect, or this is a conditional, right? But even with adults, it's not as if you have to get to a point where you're teaching the grammar very deductively and explicitly. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So my argument here is think about lexis, think about functions, and let's actually now amend what we said before. I said we should take a lexical approach. We should take a lexical and functional approach, and I hope you see how they go hand in hand. Just a little note here before we leave what for grammar teaching. What is prescriptive versus descriptive? So if you don't know what this means, I think it's really important. So if you're a new teacher, for example, you may not have thought about this. Prescriptive grammar, I remember when I got into learning about my own language, which was very early, and I remember I was 10 or 11 years old, and a teacher said to me, I said, "Oh, I'm done." And she said, "No, cakes get done, people get finished." Like, you're not supposed to say, "I'm done." You're supposed to say, "I'm finished." Well, if you go back very, very, very far, you can see that at one point that was strange to say, "I'm done," because it was not used that way. But guess what? Language evolves, grammar changes. Prescriptive grammar is what people say are the way it's supposed to be. That's that rule-based idea. But things do not stay the same with how people use grammar and vocabulary, etc. And that's what descriptive grammar is. So an example of this, a very common example, is sentences shouldn't end with a preposition, right? So you should say the game I participated in. No, the game in which I participated. The truth, of course, is that people say both. It's different context. Appropriateness is the key. So more formal English would be the game I participated in which I participated. But what about a sentence like, "What are you talking about?" About's a preposition. Would we say, "About what are you talking?" Nobody says that. So in fact, the prescriptive rule is not a rule at all. It's something somebody said once for whatever reason, and there's a lot of stories about the preposition one. But how about another one? And I think you'll agree this is about formality and appropriateness, not about right and wrong. If I'm telling a story about my friend, and I said, "Well, she said this, and then I said that, and then I switched the narrative present, and she says, and then I say, and then she goes, and then I go." Oh, going somewhere? No, going meaning says. That is clearly a use of descriptive grammar. It's not taught as the way it's supposed to be, but I don't think prescriptive descriptive is even the best here. I think what's best is I've used this word already a couple times. Appropriateness. What's the situation? Are you with friends? Are you with in a job interview? And that's what's really important here. Moving on to who. Or is it whom? There's another prescriptive descriptive grammar. Whom is disappearing from English. So if you are insisting, oh, we have to say whom and do this, two things wrong there. Again, language evolves. There's another prescriptive, descriptive. And the other thing is, I think that's a waste of time. There's so much other things you could be thinking about besides who and whom. But who meaning we need to think, obviously, about our students' ages, their levels, their needs, their purpose. This is kind of woven throughout what we're talking about here. And also, as I mentioned, who are the students in terms of the school, the program. So I can make these suggestions about teaching lexically, teaching functions first, what are the situations, and then what vocabulary chunks are needed, what functional language, and the grammar kind of goes along there. But if you need to teach grammar in a more deductive way, I should have defined that earlier, we're going to get to it, but a way that's more direct and maybe more traditional, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. And maybe you have no choice. But anyway, the point is, you always need to consider these issues. But I hope that after considering them, you'll think about some of the things I'm saying if they're not included in your syllabus and textbook to help you teach grammar more effectively. So when here does not mean, it's a little confusing maybe with what. I don't mean when, like when do you teach modal verbs or the present perfect, but more like when as a teacher. So, for example, let's start with this, right? Do you focus on grammar like, okay, in the lesson, we are going to talk about, future simple with going to and will. Like, what's the difference between going to and will? That it's really a grammar focus, as opposed to you're doing some other activity, and there's grammar there, so you talk about it. Now, the focus on grammar as in the lesson does not have to be one approach. There are different ways. You could do it in a more inductive approach. That's coming in the next slide. Let's just get to that. But before we do deductive, inductive, the idea here is you can teach grammar as you come thinking, okay, today I want my students to I'm going to present, practice, and produce this grammar structure. They need this for the test, or they need this to build their skills, as opposed to, okay, you're doing an activity. Let's say you're reading a story. You notice that there is grammar in there that you can teach. You didn't think about that ahead of time, and you stop and you explain grammar and you do it that way. So, it isn't when, that's the long one. It's how. Here we go. Yes, getting closer to inductive and deductive. So the other thing to think about is grammar, the focus that you have on grammar, a way that you are trying to help your students think consciously about it. Like, this is the structure, like second conditional, I'm going to learn this today. Or you're doing things with them with grammar so that they're not thinking so much about it. They are acquiring it through other ways that you're teaching. So thank you. I should have done this much earlier. There's a reason why when you look at how to prepare a grammar lesson, you usually hit this first, because it kind of brings in the things that I've been saying, those other words, conscious, less conscious, or is it a direct lesson, or is it something that you're doing kind of along the way with grammar? So the idea of deductive and inductive, sorry, let me go back here, right? Deductive meaning that you give an example of a grammar structure and you explain how it works, right? You present it. It could be in a creative way, a not so creative way, but it's very clear that, this is what you're going to focus on. You're focusing on grammar in your lesson. An inductive approach is more that you, and this happens a lot with lexical approach, right? Is that you've got a lot of examples of lexical chunks and vocabulary, functional vocabulary, let's say for agreeing and disagreeing. And then within agreeing and disagreeing, you are teaching grammar because you are having the students are noticing it. You help them notice the grammar in what they are learning. So traditionally, deductive is the 3 Ps. It doesn't have to. Inductive could also can include this, but traditionally, deductive is more you present it. Okay, this is this is comparative and superlatives. It could be in a creative way. You tell a little story about something, and then you put the form up there, but it's really presenting the form, giving students controlled practice with the form, and then an opportunity for them to produce it, less with the repetitive repetition, the practice, and moving to a freer way of practicing that could be called more production. And I'm going to give you an example of this because it's so important. But before we get to the example, I think another way to think about the 3 Ps is when you learn a language, you study it, you practice it, and you use it. And if you know me, Fluent CMC, you know that I believe the biggest problem, more important than anything we're really talking about today, in my strong opinion, is not how you present it and how students study it, but how much practice they get in a way that's meaningful and fun so that they can produce it more naturally, and that means using it. So how they study it, to me, studying also meaning how you present it, how the book presents it, that's not as important as how much exposure they get and practice with it, if that exposure and practice is motivating for them, engages them. So here's my example. I'm going to teach this like a little lesson. Do you like this? You ask questions. You ask questions? You go to the movie? It's possible with your friends, right, to use this word order, but generally, right, we don't do this. So you could elicit from the students also. What would we say instead? Not you ask questions, but okay, do you ask questions? And maybe some people, oh yeah, I don't know that, or they remember this is low, maybe lower level here. Good, but how about this? Is it do? Oh, does. So does she? We have an S there. So then that means this must be what? Oh, does she take courses? Yes, she. So I'm eliciting here. I'm not saying this is a lesson on how to use the present tense or third person singular needs an S, right? So it's more inductive in that sense, but this is clearly grammar focused. I'm using very simple vocabulary on purpose to really focus on the grammar. So does she take? Yes, she take or takes them. Oh, so again, take no S, but takes now Y. I'm not explaining that as much as getting them to notice the pattern. Does she take? Yes, she takes. She, right? How about this one? Okay, does. Probably most people got does. Yes, she. Now in French, for example, yes, she asks. Ooh, but in English, yes, she does. Lots of stuff going on here that, if whether they're young learners, whether they're low-level adults, I don't think personally focusing on rules and talking about the structure first is the point. The point is, right, to get them to notice the grammar, important grammar. to be accurate, not to communicate basic things, but if you don't have those S's or you do have the S in the wrong place, and that's also the singular plural questions, then that's going to be a problem for most people in terms of how they're judged when they're communicating, especially if they're doing this for a test or for a job, et cetera, et cetera. And now I've got the stress. Does she take courses? Yes, she takes them. She takes English and math, and I'll get the students to repeat that. So here comes the practice. We're moving in from presentation to practice. My presentation was very inductive, as you saw. Does she ask questions? Yes, she does. She asks questions in class. The other inductive thing here is this is the beginning of a song, but I'm not saying it's a song. Here, I'm still not going to say, I'm going to say, okay, let's take turns. Conversation. One half of the room is black, one is blue. Does she take courses? Yes, she takes them. Okay. And then we continue. So now is this drilling, but drilling in a way, in what way? With rhyme, with rhythm. So it continues. So if you really think about this grammar, it's such basic grammar. At the same time, it's crazy and confusing. Does, do, she does, right? Have, has, and then, if you think about it, it'll rattle your brain. But the pattern, with enough practice, can stick in their heads. So it goes to here, and then there's a video. I'll just show you a little bit of it.
Let's see.
Once again,
Let's see.
Let me go back because I don't think you. So check out the video to practice.
Let's see.
Just show you the beginning.
Let's see.
Does she take courses? Yes, she takes them. She takes English and math. Does she ask questions? Yes, she does. She asks questions.
What about production? So this is a very traditional idea here, because my practice was not very traditional with rap, but you can do something very traditional, which can work really well, which is just a basic interview with your partner. So you could put this on the board or put it on a piece of paper or on the projector, right? Okay, you're going to interview your partner. Here are some questions to ask. So you can make it very controlled. Okay, ask these questions, but then you could also leave some open-ended questions, and you could go help them if they're with their sentences. So does she live? But is that the question you're going to ask your partner? No, the question you're going to ask your partner is, do you live? Do you live in Paris? Do you like watching movies? And the answer will be, yes, I do. No, I don't. What do you do every morning? I eat, I walk, right? But then when you report, she said, I like watching movies, so she likes, right? So there's that S that's so hard for students to get and may or may not be that important in your opinion, but trust me, they'll get to a point where if they don't notice that S and it's in their emails and it's in their presentations, that's going to probably affect their level of English, their confidence, and how they are perceived. So remember I said earlier, we want to get the negative, the affirmative, the negative, and the interrogative. So we've got all of that happening here. Yeah, we have a little more time. I want to show you something else. Imagine you do some really cool thing with comparatives and superlatives. You could have a really cool lesson, but the problem you notice is that when students try to produce it, they can't remember. And that's where the practice comes in. And that's why I make songs like whether you're young, younger, youngest, or old, older, oldest. If you're shy, shyest, shyest, or bold, bolder, boldest, follow fluency MC. Stick with me and you'll see. We keep it hot, hotter, hottest, never cold, colder, coldest. So is this enough to learn how to use comparative and superlatives? Not at all. What this is, though, is a way to get those structures in their heads. So if you have a lesson on how it works, then they practice with a song like this. And then in class, you go to the production part and they're making their own sentences and dialogues and things. They're more likely to remember and feel more motivated and confident because they can remember. And that's why the practice piece to me is the most important thing you can do. And you don't have to do it yourself. You can give them practice with my songs, with games. I'm going to talk about games in a moment, especially out of the classroom. You know, that's what I'm always talking about. In class, there's the presentation and there's the production, right? The communication. You need to be there to help them understand language. And you need to be there to guide them while they're producing it. But the repetition, the practice has to happen, but no time in class for that. Better to use the time for the other things. And at home, if they're into the game or into the video, into the song, they can get the structures they need. I want to show you that, to me, this song that I wrote is a great example of how we can't really think about grammar teaching as, okay, this structure first, this structure first. It doesn't build that way. So I tell students, okay, imagine I left the room and I came back. So this is the past. And I said, I can't find my phone. What's the question I would ask? So this is a little higher level now, older students. Would I say, did you see it? Do you see it? So I try to elicit this. Have you seen it? Very, very basic conversation about the phone. So I wrote this song not thinking about grammar first. I wrote the song thinking about situation, basic situation. And when I started writing it, thinking I'm going to use the most basic language for this basic situation, what did I discover? Look how much grammar there is. So yes, lexis is most important, but not when you're talking about that. Not, it's always most important. But when you need to be very specific about time, then all this grammar comes in. But can you imagine explaining all the grammar? Is it necessary? Or isn't it better to think about this as a situation, have students engage in repeating the language, and then, as we said before, make their own sentences, produce their own language, right? We have past simple, we have present perfect, we have present simple, we have negative structures, we have WH questions, we have a negative question, yes or no question with didn't you, right? We have modal verbs. Can't, for example. So really, this it continues. We have noun clauses. I'm not sure what you did with them, where you put them, right? So that's why, to me, it's ridiculous, that whole idea of notion of when do we teach? If we think, okay, what is the situation students need? What function do they need? And then we bring in the language. It could be something that is not on the syllabus. Oh, they're not ready to do this yet. Negative questions. But, how about something like, don't you want something? It's so common to use a negative question, and it's not difficult if they're not thinking about the grammar. If you're thinking too much about the grammar, it doesn't work. I've been looking all over, right? Present perfect continuous, if it's taught as, we're going to learn present perfect continuous, and I'm not saying that it never should. And if you are doing it that way, I would strongly suggest they get practice this way. right? But even without learning it specifically as present perfect continuous, I think if they have a song, I've been looking all over, and then you give them practice, I've been doing, what other things I've been doing? I've been doing these things, right? It can, right, get in the brain and be there to then communicate basic things like this without worrying about how the structure is formed. Although then also you can go back, and if there are mistakes or issues, oh, okay, this is how the structure is formed, as opposed to starting with, here's the present perfect continuous. So this is another song with a video. I'm happy to send the links, but you also can just find these very easily. The first one was does she? The second one, fresh, fresher, freshest, and this is have you seen it? So more, and if you're teaching present simple versus present perfect, that became kind of my motivation here more than anything else, because those lessons on what's the difference between present simple, preterite and present perfect, really don't, in my experience, lead to students feeling comfortable and developing accuracy and fluency with these verb tenses. But if you mix them up, not in an unnatural way, on the contrary, look how, they're mixed. Did it fall out of your pocket? Have you checked? Why is it, did you, have you checked, have you looked? We can talk about why, but is that going to lead to students really using these structures as opposed to getting enough practice with situations like this? But it's not just songs. There are many ways to practice. Games and songs, to me, short videos, best way, especially because they can do them outside of the classroom and they're fun and motivating. If it's a good song or a good game, please feel free not feel free. I would encourage you. Please follow me on Bamboozle. Did you catch that? Bamboozle. I mention it every time I'm here with American TESOL Institute. It's free to join. If you follow me, you'll see here's adjective plus preposition. There's a good lexical chunking game. Adjective clauses, I only have one there. This is a new one I'm making. But anyway, one question. Yeah, so I've got to work on that. But anyway, games, getting practice the same way we do with songs, in a fun way through meaningful repetition. And I'm going to do more with games, specifically games, and then that'll be a way to talk about teaching grammar again, but going the other way, starting with the game. And just as always, want to throw this in here, that if you're talking to students, if in the case of grammar, about how the present perfect continuous is different from the preterite and all of that, and you expect them to kind of be able to analyze and apply, but they don't have, in this case with Bloom's taxonomy, I'd say the lexical chunks, right, to hang that on. I don't think it's worth it. I would go as far as to say that teaching verb tenses should wait till at least the intermediate level. I don't mean that they're not using verb tenses, but I mean talking about verb tenses as such, beyond those basic ones I showed you at the beginning. Do you play Uno? If you were in my last webinar, you know that I have a game, and you can see a little bit in this video here. And I'll talk about how this follows everything I've been saying about grammar practice. In this game, you are not thinking about irregular verbs, how they're formed or how they're used. You just know you've got sentences, right, that are high frequency verb, high frequency sentence, and you're hearing them. You can't hear it right now in this video, but you can hear it fell on the floor. He stuck it on the wall. And I've got more games coming, but the point is, right, you're not thinking about, I'm studying irregular verbs or how that works. You're just getting the repetition, trying to beat the game. And my point is, if you take a quiz, and I have a quiz now, and if you want the link to this game, it's free. totally free. You can play on Google Play with an Android phone, or you can play on the web on a browser. I have a quiz with all those verbs, gap fill, basic thing, and try it, because I've done this with my students. When they take the quiz, they get like 65% correct. Then they play the game, but they play the game not as a way to, I have to remember these. They play to win, and paradoxically, learning when you're not looking, they remember these irregular verbs, and they take the quiz again, and boom, 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 they remember just from playing the game. I see in the chat it is available and it's free, and I'll send you what I need to do. I'll just put this in the chat, but I'll just show you in a minute, Laurence, how you can get that. But before that, practice makes. This is my signature exit every time now. Practice makes progress. Perfect sounds too stressful, like prescriptive grammar. You have to say it this way. But even better is practice makes permanence, meaning it sticks in our heads, right? I can't explain why it's present perfect or preterite, but I know when to say it and how to say it because it's just up there from the practice I got. And when you relax and enjoy your time, it's easy to learn with rhythm and rhyme. You'll learn without looking when you stop feeling stressed. Having fun when you learn is when you learn the best. And the English learners everywhere, don't ever forget, the more you practice, the better you get. The better you get, the further you go. Just relax, repeat, remember, and you'll find your flow. My friends, this is the most important. What we learn with pleasure, we never forget. So I hope if you're here and you were following, you've got some pleasure from what we did today, even though maybe at times it was kind of all over the place. I hope if you go back and watch again, you can feel inspired to dig deeper, go out, learn more, because of course, in a short time, we can't hit on everything that we need to hit on. Speaking of not hitting on everything, you're welcome if you want more from me to email me. If you want the link to the Fluency Cards game, which is available, anybody here and watching, just email me. You're not bothering me. On the contrary, I enjoy it when teachers, especially through the American TESOL Institute, anyone here working with them, you're working with me. So I can send you links to videos. I can send you links to games. I can answer questions if you have them. Speaking of which, we'll stop here and we'll take questions. Just let me sign off for our video with a thank you. Thank you so much to everyone who attended live, to all the teachers watching asynchronously wherever you are, ELTs around the world. Respect, yeah. Salute to you and all you do. I hope you'll join me for another American TESOL Institute webinar next month around the same time. Be on the lookout, read the blog, check on social media. We'll let you know. And yeah, have a great day. Have a great evening, wherever you are. Peace.